Good afternoon, everybody. This webinar today, How to Find Local Information and Help, is sponsored by the Private Well class, and hopefully you're in the right place. We're located at the University of Illinois at the State Water Survey. If you're in Illinois, you're probably familiar with us, otherwise probably not. This program is funded through a grant from US EPA to Rcap, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, who is our partner on this program. And I'll mention a lot more about Rcap today. In your area, wherever you might live in the country, there's Rcap staff who would be able to help you with any well issues and things like that, and I'll go over some of that as we go through today. Okay, these webinars are all available for credit for NEHA CEs, Continuing Education Credit, and NEHA is the National Environmental Health Association. So environmental health professionals who use NEHA credits to maintain their license can attend these webinars and get credit in that respect. And so here's the information for that. NEHA is on a 2-year credentialing cycle. So if your cycle just started on December 1st, then after today, you wouldn't be able to take the same webinar on local information again until after 12/1/2022. And we've only done this webinar one other time, and that was on 9/18 of 2019, as it shows below. And I do also want to mention that we are licensed Illinois licensed environmental health professional credentialer, so we can give credit for that for this webinar as well. Katie Buckley's with me. I'm probably getting ahead of myself. And there's our email address, but we can provide these things that are listed here, and they're also in the handouts, the certificate of completion and local, and the agenda for today. And so you can download those. So about today's webinar, as I mentioned, it's part of a national program that's being implemented through Rcap to support private well owners, and it's funded by US EPA. And today's lesson specifically is part of, is really based on our lesson 7 of our 10-lesson class. So a lot of people think our webinars are our class. They're not. They're meant to supplement it. We have a 10-lesson class that you can sign up for, and I'll show that information during today's webinar as well. It sends you a PDF once a week for 10 weeks with the 10 lessons, and there's a lot more detail there than we can do in an hour and a half. And it's meant to provide well owners with a basic understanding of how water gets in their well, all those things, what they need to do to maintain it, all that sort of stuff. And it's certainly worth your time. If you're here because you're interested in taking care of your well, you should have already taken our class, or at least you should sign up for it and take it. And again, like everything else that we do, luckily, because we're grant funded, it's all free. We did get a number of questions in advance from you all who registered, and we're going to answer some of those at the end. But if you have a different question or something comes up today that I say, or that's on the screen and you have a question about it, you can put your question in the question box or the chat box on your GoToWebinar screen. And Katie's going to monitor that today and make a list of those questions, and we'll pull them up at the end and we'll try to go through them. I may not be able to answer them, and I'll tell you if I can't, but we'll go through what's there for those who are willing to stick around. My name is Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist here at the Water Survey, and I manage the private well class program. And Katie is also with us. She's a water resources outreach specialist, and she's taking your questions, and she'll also work with those of you that need certificates or would like a certificate for some kind of credentialing at the end after this is through. So I mentioned Rcap several times. They're a national organization. They most of their staff are water and wastewater operators, and they help rural and small communities around the country with their water and wastewater issues. They also have private well staff in each of their 6 regions. So each of these 6 organizations form the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and each of these is an independent nonprofit that also works in their states. You know, like RCAC is based in California. They have a large grant with the state of California to help well owners there because of the drought that has been going on for a number of years. And so they do a lot of work outside of our private well program that also supports private well owners in small communities and their water supplies. These are folks you should know in your area, and there's a staff person in every state. The private well person may not be in your state, but they will come to your state. Like for Midwest Assistance Program, the lead is Jesse Campbell. He's in Missouri, but he travels throughout the whole region, doing assessments, giving workshops, doing things to help well owners in those 9 states. So the water survey, most of you have never heard of. We're the only one in the country. I think Oklahoma has one now. They just started it 15 or 20 years ago. But the Illinois State Water Survey has been around since 1895. Matter of fact, this is our 125th anniversary, and it started on the campus of the U of I through the state legislature to document and determine what is going on with water quality in the state. It was right at the time when there were cholera and typhoid outbreaks around the state and public water supplies, and this is pre-chlorination, and so the water survey started in the chemistry department at the University of Illinois. Now we have over 100 staff that do applied research in public service. We house the state's well logs. We have a public service lab for well owners in Illinois, and it's an organization that really has its pulse on the things related to water in the state and in the nation. So it's really cool to work here. Actually, these are from this image. I show it all the time. It's from our records for Pana, Illinois. If you go into our file room, there's several million pieces of paper in there for every well. Every community has a water supply, both groundwater and surface water. And this is from 1916. There was a typhoid outbreak, and the water survey went down and investigated why that happened. They assumed it was the water supply or the fact that they didn't have a wastewater system yet, but it turned out it was the Pana Ice Cream Company. They had one large vat where 7 farmers brought their milk, and they poured it all into the same large tank, and folks used a bucket to get their milk out. And that was where the typhoid was coming from. And our scientists figured that out back in the day. And it's a pretty interesting story. This is another picture from our archives. Young man, this is in New Athens, Illinois in 1911, helping a water survey scientist. And, that's what his field chemistry kit looked like in the day. But we were doing that sort of stuff that far back. So it's a pretty interesting place to work. So getting on to our program, things to remember as a well owner that, private wells are not regulated. It's really up to the owner or user to be sure water's safe to drink. And there's a caveat there that some states and some local jurisdictions are starting to regulate private wells in some ways. The state of New Jersey was one of the first. For every home that's sold, bought or sold property that has a well, you're required to get a water sample done. They don't share the results publicly, but they share them with the buyer and the seller. So a few states have those rules now. Rhode Island has one that's even a little stricter. Some counties or local jurisdictions have developed these rules as well. But you can check that out by talking to your local health department. In most cases, in most states like Illinois and certainly through the Midwest, there are no regulations related to wells once they've been drilled. And if new regulations come along, existing wells are grandfathered in. So we see a lot of wells that don't meet current well construction code because they were drilled before those codes were actually law. So the other thing to remember is water might look and taste great, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have a contaminant in it. They can be colorless, odorless, or have no taste. My dad, I grew up on a dug well in rural Illinois on a farm. Our well was only 14 feet deep and it was cloudy, and every time it rained hard, our water was. So it wasn't safe. It wasn't protected at the surface. We had surface infiltration in our well. But my dad always swore it was better than city water because it didn't have chemicals in it. Cities put chemicals in their water and that makes it bad. And that's the mentality a lot of folks still have. And that's totally backwards, right? They put things in the water to remove contaminants or to chlorinate it or add disinfectant to make sure that city water doesn't have bacteria in it in the distribution lines and things like that. So it's safe to drink, and that's what the Safe Drinking Water Act mandates. Every state has to follow those rules, and every community does. So now I do live in town, and I pay $40 to $50 a month. Actually, as now my daughter's getting older, it's more like $60 to $70 a month. But that's the cost of for 150,000 residents here to maintain all the infrastructure, all the pipes, make sure the water's tested and treated, and there's a licensed water operator running the system to make sure that it's being done correctly. And if you're a well owner, you're the operator of a very small water system. And so one of the things I mentioned to some folks is you should put a little money away. Your pump's going to fail eventually, or you're going to have a problem, or you may test and find you need to treat for something, and having a little bit put away, pay yourself a water bill is one way to have those funds available when that happens. You know, the pumps and wells are mechanical devices, if you will, and they don't last forever. Okay, so what this program is really about is helping you as a well owner be more aware, and you know, you need to understand about your well. You need a well log if there is one. You need to understand the geology, so the depth, the pump setting, if there's a screen, which means it's typically a sand and gravel well, where the screen is at, how deep, if it's got how much casing there is, if it's a bedrock well. All those things matter when you start talking about water quality, how protected it is from the surface. The other things you should know if there are naturally occurring contaminants or any other water quality issues near you, or if your water source or your aquifer. And that could be maybe you're near a gas station or some kind of factory. It could be, you know, in much of the country, there are natural occurring arsenic problems in some aquifers. You know, we have 2 areas in the state of Illinois that typically have higher arsenic, and we're aware of that. The counties are aware of that, and they make the well owners aware of that. And that's something you should test for. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And hopefully what all this does, taking our class, going through our webinars helps you learn the right questions to ask from your local sources of information. Because in the end, if you're asking me a question about some town, small town, or near a small town in some state that I've never been in, I've been in most states, I guess, but I'm not going to have the background knowledge to answer your question as well, depending on the type of question. But a local source of information does, and that's the whole point of this webinar today. And the last thing, and we talk about this a lot, is you need to sample your well for the reasons I mentioned before. If you don't sample, you don't really know the water quality. And it doesn't mean you have, some people think, well, I don't want a well because if I have to sample, that means there must be something wrong. No, you need to sample so that you know what's going on. And just like a community water supply, they have to sample every quarter if they to meet the rules of the legal responsibility of being a public water supply. So sampling is something that just should be part of a good best practice for everyone, and we'll go over those details too as we move forward. So we're going to discuss a few things today: well logs, why you need them, how you can find that information. Excuse me. Other information you should know, you know, about the aquifer you're getting your water from, what your water level is, what kind of water quality might be there naturally. You know, there's a lot of hard water, especially in Illinois with iron problems. So those things, knowing that will help you understand why you might need a softener or some other, or a filter. Otherwise, you might have red staining, you know, on your porcelain and stuff like that. A little bit about financial help. I'm going to go over more of that than I probably should, because we just did a webinar on financial stuff 2 months ago, and I'll show that too. And then sampling. You know, most of the questions we get, I would say by far the most common question is, what should I sample for, and how do I sample, where, why, when, and how? And so we will go over that today. So the best support you can get is locally, as I mentioned. They know your regulations, your local conditions, and your job really as a well owner is to find out who those folks are and do the investigation part of that, so that you know who to call when you have a problem or if you have a question. So they could be your contractor, a drilling contractor, a health department, the regulators in your state. You know, in Illinois, our Department of Public Health regulates drillers and well construction code. In Washington State, that's the Department of Ecology. In Wisconsin, that's DNR. You know, in some states it's a DEP or DEQ. There's just, it's whatever state agency that may be, they're there to help you. And so you should reach out to those folks. And I didn't mention here co-op extension as well. It's very helpful. In some states, they actually have a really robust private well program of their own. And hopefully I'll mention that today. I think I have a slide about that. So typically for your log itself, your driller is your best source. If you know who drilled your well, What I tell well owners is if you're going to drill a well, you should have it in the contract that they're giving you a copy of all the paperwork related to your well, how deep the pump's set, the well log information, and it's important for you to know that stuff because drillers go away. There's a number of questions today from people who said, I can't find my log, the state doesn't have it, and the drillers are not in business anymore. And that is going to happen eventually. So it's important to have that information, and especially when you drill the well is the best time. And anytime you have the well worked on, if you have to lower the pump, if it's a submersible pump or whatever, you need to have that information. And so, they are your best source if you know who that is. And in a lot of cases, you're not buying. It's not a new home. It's somebody else built a home. It could be 100 years ago, and in that case, there's likely no log or no information available because there were no requirements in those days to file any information. The only thing there might be, I know in some cases we've found information about a well because somebody had a water quality sample done in our lab. One of my colleagues moved to a farmhouse. There is no log for it, but we found in 1963 the previous owner had had the water survey do a water quality sample. So from that information, at least we knew the depth and we knew what the water quality was then in the aquifer. And so, there's a lot of ways to investigate that. But, the bottom bullet here, it's important to know the depth, the geology, and well type, because you should learn the basics of those things so you understand where your water's coming from, and you also understand what might be causing a problem. In some cases, like high iron, you're going to have iron if it's groundwater in Illinois in all likelihood, and that's just the way it is. So you need to take care of that either with a filter or some other treatment device. So it's really simple, honestly. You just California water well logs is a Google search I did here, and recently California passed a law making all this stuff available. It used to be that you could not get your well log. I think you had to get it from the county and you had to be the owner. I know early in our program, I think 2013 or so, I had a well owner who had a problem. Their well had gone dry because of the drought there and they were drilling a deeper well and he wanted his information. I called the county for him and they wouldn't give it to me. He had to call them and get the information and then fax it to me at the time. But now California has opened up all that data and you can get online and see it. And I'm just going to run through a few examples. So this is California's open data portal. It's actually really nice. They've done, it's pretty recent. It's only a few years old now. So they did it right. They includes ArcGIS features. So you can download those things if you're someone who uses ArcGIS like I do. And plus all the information on geology as well as the well completion reports, and just there's a multitude of information available. And so you can, like as I mentioned, they have ArcGIS features, completion reports. All these are layers, so you can go in and download those things, or you can look on a viewer. If you can see up here, it says View Footprint and ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. That's something anyone can use on the web. So if you go to this website and you get to the spot, you can click on that, and that's why it's a different color because I had clicked on it, and you can see all the well completion reports in the same way with other layers, if you will. And so when you do that, here's what you get. And several states have this sort of feature. And so you can see right there who the driller is. You can look at all the, if you're in here, your well may not be in here and you can't find the log, that means they don't have it on file. But if you start looking at all these other well logs, you may find that Easton Well Drilling is a predominant driller in that area. And so that'd be the first place I'd call if I'm trying to find information about my well. They may have it. It could be that the driller who drilled your well's out of business. Sometimes those drillers pass on that information to another driller when they retire or get out of business. There's a lot of ways to find that information, and it may not happen, but it's worth looking for that stuff. And if you click on one, you can also download, you can look at the reports this way. You can see more details. If you follow, you can see on this bar at the bottom, I'm only in the first quarter or fifth of how far that line goes to the right with information about the well. And I searched on a specific well in this case. New York, this is their, New York is unique in that they're one of the last states to require logs to be filed. They didn't start that until 2000. So I know we had a question from a well owner today saying my well was drilled in 1999. The state doesn't have it on file. And so, that's an issue because most wells were drilled before 2000, except in new areas or where there's new houses and that sort of thing. And then you're more likely to find the driller because they're more likely still in business. And so it's all good. It's these older wells that are a problem. But you can do the same thing. You can search here, and it's very different. This system certainly shows all the wells on file, but they only have about 20%, if that, of the actual wells that have been drilled in New York on file with an actual log. Now, they did some work through their health department to identify people with wells based on their tax parcel information, and they uncovered properties that have for about 760,000 more wells. I believe that's the right number, which, that's awesome that they at least know where the wells are, but they don't have any of the details. And, you're interested in the details for your well. This is the information. This is just one of the search results that I did on New York's site. It tells you the address, all that information, just like in Illinois, it's all public information. But the thing I'll point out here, I did some work in New York a few years ago, working with some folks there that had real water quality problems. It's mostly bedrock in a lot of areas of the state, bedrock wells. And a well may be 300 feet deep, but it might only have, and these are all shallow, but we ran across some wells that were pretty deep, but they had very little casing. And you can see the casing length is fourth from the right, and most of them don't have that information, but the ones that do says 19 feet of casing for a well that's 80 feet deep. That's typical in a bedrock well that you have a deeper well than you do casing, but the fact that it's only 19 feet of casing, which in Illinois now, I think the law is it's got to be 50 feet of case. It's got to be cased to 50 feet if it's that deep or deeper. And New York, I believe, has changed that record, that requirement as well. But it means that water only has to seep into the ground 20 feet, or in the case of the other well, 10 feet, to get into your well. And so that's not very protective. And yeah, it's just something. That's why you need to know what's in what your well log says and what information you have. And also some of their logs. This is a well that was drilled in 2006. It's not as robust as some others. I'll show you what Illinois does. And I'm not sure if this has changed or not. This might be old, but this is a log that I pulled up from going on their website. And so there is some information here, the depth, the size of the casing, but there's not it just says topsoil and then rock. It started at 1 foot. And so this is definitely a bedrock well, and it's got 10 feet of casing, it looks like. So there's a lot more information that could be on a well log, and I'll show you some examples of that. So here in Illinois, our State Water Survey and State Geological Survey are sister agencies under one department on the campus of the U of I. And so we share a lot of information. They do coal and other things, bridge borings and all that stuff, where we concentrate just on water well logs. But you can get to, in Illinois, you can go to the GeoSurvey's website. On the right-hand side is Illinois Water Well, Illwater, which is a poor name in my opinion, but that's what we all call it. And you can go to the interactive map. It's another GIS viewer, but it's really cool. You can pick which layers you want to show. Like this one I'm showing, a sand and gravel aquifer is the underlying where there is aquifer and not aquifer, and then all the well logs. And some of those are different colors because they're different types of wells, but you can zoom in then to an area. And so I zoomed in near our airport, near Champaign-Urbana, and I clicked on a well, the one that's got the little arrow there. It's 267 feet deep, 269. I think there's more than one well. There's 3, it says. Well information, 2 of 3. So there's 3 wells right within that same location. But it gives you that, and if you click on the API number, which is the the State GeoSurvey's way of recording those things, you can get this is actually this is a log that's produced based on data in their database. So they take the driller's log and they put the information in a database, including the geology, and then this gets spit out. And we're right now in the middle of including the actual scans of the original well logs, which is what the water survey has, and that's the blue that's on here. And not every, if you're in Illinois, not every well you look up will have this blue where it says get the file from the water survey. But if you do that, you can see the actual original log that was scanned. This is from 1968. So I know there was a question about what should be on a log, and I'm not going to cover that at the end, but this is a pretty well filled out well log. It's got the geology, the thickness and depths, so you know what's there. This driller did a good job of explaining what type of material. You know, some drillers who are drilling down to bedrock and they know they'll just put drift for 80 feet or 110 feet and then bedrock. And that's not very helpful because we use this information to understand how water flows through the system for modeling groundwater flow and pumpage withdrawals and a lot of different things. But it's got all the information on the type of well. It's a small well, obviously, and where the screen is. This particular well has a screen, 7 foot of slotted screen. It's got a pit from 0 to 5 feet, and then it's a 4-inch it's a small well after that. And you know, before the advent of pitless adapters in cold climates, people put their wells down in pits so they're below the frost line. And now a pitless adapter handles that, so you can have your well come up to the surface. And so this is a good example of that. And they're getting their water from sand, who the owner is, the address, who the driller was, all that information's on here. They even did a static and a pumping water level. So most of the time you drill a well, if you are using drilling mud, you have to pump that water out and until it's clean, and then you have to take a sample. That's today. But you also, sometimes they'll put a bigger pump in, like this had a 15 gallon per minute pump in it. That's not the pump they used for the homeowner. They probably had a 5 gallon per minute pump because that's really what you need for just a home, depending on whether they had livestock or those sorts of things, but your driller would help with that. But you can see the static water level was 91 feet, and the pumping water level after pumping 2 hours at 15 gallons a minute, this is number 17 I'm talking about, went down to 117 feet, 118 feet. So, you know, there's still a lot of water in that well, depending on where the pump was set. Does it say that on here? I don't think they put the pump depth. Yeah, they did not. They didn't put under number 5. They could have put it's a 3/4 horse capacity pump, but they didn't put GPMs and they didn't put depth that they set the pump at. But I imagine, you know, if you're pumping 5 gallons a minute, the water level is not going to drop to 117. It's going to be less than that because you're not stressing the well as much. Here's just another example. This one was typed up in the office. It's later, but it's same thing. This is a bedrock well, so there is no screen. And you can see, if you look at number 15, there's PVC from 1 to 179 feet, and then there's 20 feet from 179 to 199. There's black steel. So that's where they seeded the casing in the bedrock. And if you look down at number 18 for the formation, they hit bedrock at 189. So below 189, it's bedrock. And so they put the casing 10 feet into the rock, and then the rest of it's an open hole. And that's because water doesn't come from rock like it does through sand, where there's, you know, porosity in the sand. It's 30% of, you know, if you had a jar of sand, 30% of that's air. And so in an aquifer, if you have a sand and gravel aquifer, 30%, if it's well sorted, would be water. And so, but in bedrock, some sandstones can have water stored in them, but most of the time it's water flowing through the cracks in the rock. Okay, and that's why you leave it open hole. You have most bedrock wells are open below the casing so that you can take advantage of any fractures you hit, and that's where the water is actually coming in the well when you pump it, it can refill. So the other things you should be aware of are what kind of aquifer you have where you live, if there's any water quality issues in that aquifer naturally occurring, like arsenic, because that occurs, there can be other things in the water, and I'll show some examples later. But I just looked at Oklahoma aquifer maps just to see what I found. And boy, I found a lot of information. I just picked states at random originally when I did this. And so there's a lot of great information that they put together there. And if you're in Oklahoma, again, you have a map viewer, or you can have PDFs of this information. And so I clicked on aquifers, and there's just nice PDF handout showing the major aquifers in the state. So if you call your state geological surveyor, your water resources board, and get to an actual geologist or hydrologist who understands these things, and you say, if we pick the one in the middle, the R, I should have looked this up. RS is Rush Springs aquifer. They'll know, they might have that kind of information available, and it gives you an idea. You can even search then on Google for Rush Springs aquifer in Oklahoma, and there may be information from a study that was done or some water quality samples that were collected that give you an idea of what the natural water quality is there. Again, it's all about being inquisitive and finding out who the right people are. And so again, here's the interactive map viewer, and if you go in there, so on the left here are layers. And if you're not familiar with GIS, every layer, so the wells are a layer, the aquifers are a layer, the town names are a layer, the county boundaries or local boundaries are a layer. Everything is a separate layer that's then put together to make this map. The rivers are a layer, for instance. And so this has everything added. And at this scale, the size of the dots there make that pretty cumbersome, but you can see where there's more density and less density. So we want to zoom in. And so I zoomed into an area that shows like the red looks like branches here are actual alluvial aquifers, which the alluvium is river deposited sand. So you find this along river bottoms, and that's exactly what these are. There's rivers in the middle of each of these, and that's where the surface rivers run. And so you learn a lot about those sorts of things just by and I have everything on this map. If you look on the left, groundwater wells, monitoring wells, other wells, and reported well logs. So that's why there's all these colors. If I just wanted to see aquifers, I guess with the wells, you can see that, what aquifer they're all in. Major bedrock aquifers, you can see here, I've highlighted on the bottom left. And if you want to see the minor ones, that's where these alluvial aquifers come in. And so if you're in one of those river bottoms and you have a shallow well, now you know what the name of that is, and you could try to find other information. They're pretty similar. And if you have a shallow well that's in a river bottom, you're more likely to have surface influences. And so, there's things that go along with that, like you should sample for nitrates and maybe a little more often, things like that, because especially flooding events can affect your well then. And yeah. There's just a lot that goes with it, and you can learn more details about all that in our class. So if I just say reported well logs, which means these are just the well logs that they have on file, doesn't matter what type, this is what's available. And that's important because if you're trying to find a well log, if you can't find your own, if you zoom in and you're in one of these areas where there's a cluster, you may find your neighbors or 3 of your neighbors, and then you find out, oh, the same driller drilled all of these wells. That's someone you can contact if you don't have a log. And so again, it's about being investigative, if you will. Monitoring wells, I added in. So these are most likely installed by the state. We install monitoring wells just to know the water quality and the water level over long term. Like I installed some wells in the early 90s that we still measure today with telemetry. So it's continual measurements, and it helps us understand how the aquifer recovers during flooding and drought. All those sorts of things long term. They may be those type of monitoring wells. They might be, one of these clusters could be at a site like where there's a leaky underground storage tank or a landfill. There's just, it's there to monitor water levels. It's not being used as a water supply. And then, I said groundwater wells, and then it has the same sort of information available. There's 6 wells at this location. It tells you what the yield is, so you've gained some information about, it's a shallow well, it's only 60 foot deep, so it's probably in that alluvial aquifer. I mean, there's a lot to learn from looking at all this stuff, and it's pretty interesting. You have a pretty nice site. Just another example, this is a deeper well. It's 1,200 feet deep. It's commercial. And yeah, they can pump 75 gallons in a minute here, and they hit water at 380. So, even though it's a 1,200 foot well, if they drop the tape down to measure the static water level, it would be around 380. Or I'm not 100% sure that's what this means here. It could mean first water, the first aquifer that, a bedrock aquifer that had water in it available was at 382. There's probably an explanation in their legend for this, and I didn't look. Yeah, so this is that page through the Water Resources Board. A lot of good information available, and a lot of states have something like this. This is one of the better ones for sure. But you can do a search as well based on where you live, township, range, and section. So like townships would be 18 north, range 3 east or west. And they have 2 different meridians going through the state, which is why it's EIM and WIM and ECM instead of just E or W, which is what we in Illinois, they're all, there is no break in the way our data is separated. And then when you do that, you get to see that, you know, there's irrigation wells, there's public water supply wells, and domestic wells, which are private wells that would be used for water supply. They even have water level information available. You know, we're developing this for our monitoring wells to make this available online, and it's to the hour because we have telemetry on our wells that record that information, and it uses pressure transducers. So it's just good to know what the range of water level changes are in a well, especially if it's a well that's similar to yours. If there's a monitoring well nearby, you can see that if you look at the whole record, this is only 3 years, but you may have a well that's been there for 30 years and they've got all that data online. You can see what the range of water levels have been in that monitoring well to give you an idea, even where to set a pump. You know, if you're a driller or you're working with a driller, then you know that the water levels got down this low. You know, in Illinois, that was in 88. We had a heck of a drought, and also in 2012, but it was shorter. And so knowing those things can be really beneficial. So what about your state? Well, Google first and see what you can find, you know, my state water well logs. And there may not be a great site, but there'll be contacts and everything else. And so you can call or email them and start down that path. Keep a record of the people you talk to and what agency they belong to so that you remember who's helpful and who wasn't. Because you are going to run into folks who aren't, who may not know, but you know, don't let that deter you, because most of them will be, and most of them are very knowledgeable. And so there's a lot of good information you can find, not only about your well itself, but water levels, geology, water quality, the things we just went over. And you know, in Illinois, this is part of my job, as well as several of the staff here in our, I'm in the groundwater section. We take calls from well owners, even not related to our private well class program, but just well owners in Illinois, and we go around the state. We're at the state fair and have a booth set up to show people about groundwater in their wells. We do a lot of things to try to educate well owners about that, and you know, that's my job as well. So what do I test for? It's a very common question we get, and we usually put this in every webinar these days, because I know some of you may have seen this several times, especially if you're getting CEUs for it. But a lot of folks are new, or this may be the first webinar they've attended from us, and so it's important that they get all the same information. It's by far the most asked question that we get, and we get a lot of questions. I guess I didn't go over that very well. Hang on a second here, if I can go backwards. So it is different depending on where you live, what kind of geology you have, what kind of well you have. And so that's why you need to call your county or state. I said county or state health department, I forget, you know, in Illinois, these are county-based agencies, but, you know, especially out east, they're local health districts. And so call your local health district or your county or state and get to the well folks and or the environmental health programs in those health departments, and they can help you or let you know what they do for sampling, if they have their own lab, if you do, some don't, that sort of thing. But they should also know, like, you know, there's a question later about how to find information before I move to a new area. You know, if you called the Tazewell County Health Department in Illinois because you're going to move to Tazewell County, which is south of Peoria, they're going to say you want to test any well that, if you're going to buy a property, you want to test it for arsenic if there's a well on the property, because there's likely high arsenic throughout, well, not the entire county, but a fair amount of the county and surrounding counties. And so, you know, also talk to the well records folks I mentioned here, your neighbors, your driller. If you know who those people are, there's someone to lean on and ask questions from, as well as co-op extension. And so what we recommend for coliform and bacteria, or coliform bacteria and nitrate sampling. So some states require this, and that's it. And Some well owners, well, a lot of folks assume that means your well's safe. The reason you test for coliform bacteria and nitrate annually is because they're so ubiquitous in the environment, especially at the surface, because of farming practices and livestock and our septic tanks and all those sorts of things, that if you have either of those in your well or nitrated, background nitrate's probably 2 or 3 parts per million, but the standard's 10 as nitrogen, I think. Yeah. And so if it's higher than that, that's not naturally occurring in general for nitrate. And you should have no bacteria in your well, no coliform bacteria. There are natural occurring bacteria in aquifers, like methanogenic bacteria or iron-reducing bacteria. Those things are harmless. They don't have health effects, and so they're not considered in this discussion, so to speak. But the reason you test for coliform and nitrate is because if they got in your well, that means there's a pathway. So either your well's shallow and there's a shallow path between like your septic and your well, or it means that your well's not properly sealed or protected at the surface. And that could mean that the grout isn't where it's supposed to be around your casing, or there's space between the casing and the borehole so things can run right in, or it could mean that your well cap is cracked or broken, or maybe you don't have a well cap. We see tons of wells with makeshift things on them that are just wide open. Spiders, snakes, a lot of things can get in those, and you really should have a properly sealed well. And if you have a bacteria problem, that's typically what causes it. So the reason you do test for those things annually is because they indicate a pathway into your well. And it's important to do that every year because, we had a case in, I think it was Virginia, one of the Rcap folks was working with someone where they said, there's nothing wrong with this well, the homeowner did. It's right in the middle of my yard, there's nothing around it. And we keep getting bacteria hits. Well, they sent us a picture and they had a tree, probably 24 inches diameter tree, large tree, and it was only about 18 inches from their well. So roots had wrapped around that PVC casing and squeezed it and cracked it, and that's where the bacteria was coming from. So they either had to move their well, or they're going to continually have that problem. So some states have information available, or because they have a specific contaminant, they may have information available to use a well owner. So this is Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. You can put in your address and they'll tell you whether you're at risk of arsenic or uranium problems, and if it's a bedrock well. And then there's resources available to you as a well owner there, and you can zoom in. You can do a lot of things with this map, but it lets you know that, we wouldn't normally recommend somebody test for uranium. But if you're in this area, they're saying you really do need to do that. And as a better example, this is Rhode Island. They've got this map on their the Department of Health does, and the little dots are where there used to be orchards in the state. And they know there's arsenic contamination because until, probably the 60s, a lot of pesticides used in orchards were arsenic based. And so there's a ton of soil contamination in these areas. And they're just showing you that if you're near an old orchard or an existing orchard that's been there a long time, you may want to test for arsenic because it may be there. But the real reason I want to show you this picture is because of the big splotch that's in the middle. That is where there's high beryllium. And when I found this on their page, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, I honestly didn't even know that beryllium was a regulated contaminant. But under the Safe Drinking Water Act, communities have to make sure that beryllium's below a certain limit because it does have health effects. So they put this site up. It's one of the few places I've ever come across where there's high beryllium naturally occurring. So if you're in the center of Rhode Island and you have a well, you want to test for beryllium just because it can cause health effects. And you can go on EPA's website and search for primary drinking water standards, and you can find the information about beryllium, what kind of health effects it has, what the limit is. I'm sure labs in that area all know how to test for it because of this issue, but it's not something you would normally recommend. And so that's why I say you really need to investigate a little bit first before you decide what you're going to sample for and get some advice from people who are more likely to have some of those answers. And then we're starting to see some of these. This is another one of these GIS pages with a map server that you can log into or get in and look at. This is Wisconsin Department or DNR. put this together. Well, they funded it. I think Wisconsin Stevens Point, the college, university put this together. But it's this is all the private well information for Wisconsin by county. But you can see up on the upper right, I told it arsenic, but you could tell it nitrate or other things. You could tell it to search to break it down by county, township, or section. I did county. But if I'm going to move in the Green Bay area, which is where the 3 red counties are, then I'm going to test for arsenic if I'm going to move there, because clearly there's an issue. The average sample is over 21, and the health standard for a community water supply is 10. And one other thing I should mention about health standards, most people follow what's recommended and what's required by law for community water supplies in the Safe Drinking Water Act. They're called the primary drinking water standards, but private wells don't have to meet those. And I certainly run across folks, especially older farm families, where they're in Tazewell County, for instance, where their arsenic may be 60 or 80, and their response when they let me sample their well, but then I'm like, you really should be treating this and not drinking it, or not letting your kids drink it. They're like, I've drank this my whole life. My dad drank it his whole life and lived to be 96, and they think it's great. And arsenic's one of those things that it doesn't affect everybody the same, but what has been shown in health studies is that it can cause cancer and some other problems. And these are lower doses. It's not an acute risk of, it's not causing arsenic poisoning where it's going to get you right away, but it causes over time drinking that same water for years can be a problem. And so these kind of resources are the things you need to investigate. So what we suggest again is coliform nitrate annually. And this is what we recommend everybody test for. So there's other things like beryllium if you're in Rhode Island, and that's what you need to investigate. But we recommend this set of constituents, and it's really so that you have an understanding of the water quality in your well and in your plumbing. So the zinc and cadmium, copper, you're likely not to have copper naturally occurring in your water. But if you have copper pipes, which a lot of homes do, if your water is aggressive or corrosive, it can leach copper just like it leaches lead. And the lead issues that have been exploding over the last 5 or 6 years, and it is a problem if your water is corrosive. So in Illinois, we're lucky that most of our water is not corrosive. It has a higher pH, and the alkalinity and other things are such that it doesn't, start corroding things from pipes. And so instead, it forms scale on a lot of those pipes. So if you're in a home with lead or copper pipes and your water is not corrosive, it may be that there's a coated layer on your pipes inside the pipe that protects you from any lead or copper corrosion and actually drinking that, because they both cause health problems. But the only way is to test. So, and we use a lot of this information to get a good idea of the chemistry of the natural groundwater. And I'll probably go over this, but what our lab does usually is send out 2 kits to a well owner, and we ask them to collect one that's from an outside tap that doesn't go through anything in the house, any treatment or the piping. Let it run for 10 or 20 minutes first, so that you're actually getting a water sample of the groundwater. And then the second sample you collect from your kitchen tap, and that's your drinking water. And they can be very different because of your piping or because of the treatment you have. Softener changes a lot of these constituents. And matter of fact, our lab, if you send in a sample and say it's a natural sample and it hasn't been through treatment, if it's went through a softener, our lab will call you back and say, this went through a softener, because there's no way these values would be this way otherwise. And so, it's a good approach to understanding not only your natural groundwater quality, but then what might be happening as it goes through your home and through treatment and that sort of thing. Every state accredits labs. We do recommend that you use an accredited lab, certified lab. And there are some labs, including ours, that for years, our lab used to be certified, but it was expensive, and we follow all the right methods and all those things, but we aren't technically certified anymore. But what we recommend is that you should use a certified lab. It may be a little more expensive, but the quality is going to be there, because they have to submit samples, and the states check them to make sure they're doing things the right way. They send them samples and expect them to come back with the right results, all that sort of stuff. But when you talk to a lab, they should have some information on private wells for you. They should be able to answer your questions. If you call a lab and they say, we're not going to tell you what to sample for. You need to tell us. I would find another lab. And if that's not possible, then you need to find other folks to help you, and so that you can give the lab the right advice. But we work with labs all over the country, and we work through the Association of Public Health Labs, APHL, and we've had several webinars with them and explained what we tell well owners and why they need to have someone on staff who can actually answer those questions. And so I don't know if that's making a difference or not, but you'll find the right lab where they do know those things, and that's who you should use. And it may not even be in your state, but you can overnight samples, and in today's world, you don't need to be in the same state. You need to find a good lab. That's a lot more important. So yeah. As far as certified labs, how to find those? Well, the EPA has a program that each state implements. So every state has a list of labs that are certified to do drinking water samples for community water supplies, which have to test every 3 months. So you can find that list. I just did EPA certified labs, and you can go to EPA's webpage. If you scroll down this page, you can click on any state, and it provides you that state's page where they list their labs. So I did Alabama first, and you can see this is the page it took me to. You can get information down at the bottom. There's a certified lab part, but there's a lot of times other useful information for you as a well owner as well. This is New York State's certified labs. You can search by type of lab, whether you want bacteria or chemical analysis, or whether it's for certified for community testing or for private wells. There's a lot of options. One thing I will say that I forgot to mention, a certified lab may use different methods for a private well that's not a regulatory sample. And it may not be as good of a method. I would ask, and if they do use a different method, I'd find out what the difference is, and maybe, or tell them you want to do a sample that's using the certified methodologies and stuff, and it may cost a little more, but you're going to get a better result, a more consistent result. Some may use like plates and stuff that give you more of a range, which will be cheaper, and maybe that'll help, and maybe that's what you want, but they should explain that up front if they're going to have those sorts of procedures available for you. So I just went through a few and just showing examples. This is South Dakota's and Oregon's. So like I said, every state has these. They have different names. So this is the Oregon Health Authority, and this is from the first webinar we did back in 2019. And I left this in because I went and found it again today, or when I get ready for this talk. But this is going to happen sometimes. But there's still a phone number. You need to call them and find out, if there's a list of labs, that their page is broken. They may not even know it. And so this is what that looks like today. I clicked on the same button on that map for an EPA's website. And so just the day I picked in 2019 to look at that, their site was down for some reason, or that page was down. But you need to be persistent. So as far as interpreting results, there are things online where you can plug in all your values, and it'll give you an idea of whether it's exceeds a health standard or not. But we recommend you always take your results to your local health department to get an answer from them, and even show it to your doctor if there's something really elevated, because they're going to know what to do, and they should be the ones talking to you about your health, not me, a groundwater hydrologist, or not some website. Now, I'll caveat that too with the state of New Hampshire developed a tool. It's called the Be Well Informed tool, and we've talked about it on some of our other webinars if you go back and look. It's really nice, and it was funded by CDC. The state agency put it together, and it not only tells you if your results are over a given health standard for, again, for community water supplies, but it recommends types of treatment that'll take care of it. And so you can even go on our website. We held a conference in 2017, and we had New Hampshire come and talk about that site, because it's honestly that cool. So as far as funding and financing, there's a lot to being a private well owner. You're paying, if you have to replace a pump, even just to pull your pump, you're looking at $500 to $1,000 to inspect it or whatever, if somebody has to do that. Or, in our case, we've got tapes stuck down in wells that we were measuring water levels, and then we had to have a contractor come out and pull the pump to get it out. And so all those things, it matters. I mean, it's an investment, right? It might cost between 10 and 30,000 even put a well in, So it's it's like buying a car. You want to protect that the same. So you need to make sure it's put in right, that you're sampling, that you're doing all the regular maintenance. And I know several people asked about maintenance. That's why you need to take our class, because it really provides more details that you can sit down and go through and have the information at your fingertips when you need it. Because you can't read it once and then 3 years later you have a pump fail and remember everything that you read 3 years ago. We just did a actual entire webinar on funding and financing options, and we probably the largest program in the country, which I'll talk about here in a second, is funded through USDA. And we actually had the person who led that program on our webinar, and he had about 10 slides on how that works. A lot of these programs are based on economic issues for families. What their median household income has to be below a certain level, things like that. But I encourage you to go to our webinars and events page. And that's a drop down. I don't show it here, but it'll say past webinars, and then you can get to all these. So I want to say for this part of this, not only Derek Jones, who is with USDA, who spoke a couple months ago, but we also had Margaret Martins and Cindy Elliott from RCAC talk at our 2019 conference just about funding issues, because it's such a big deal for a lot of families. Our conference wasn't for well owners, it was for the stakeholders that work with them, like extension folks and treatment folks and environmental health professionals and hydrologists and folks like me. And so, but it's information they can take back then, and we recorded all these. So if you want to see a talk on the Water Well Trust, for instance, if you've heard of that from Margaret Martins, who's with the Water Systems Council, and the Water Well Trust is a kind of a piece of that, you can go listen to her presentation, or you can go on their website. So because you're individually responsible for managing your supply, again, USDA has this national program. Some states have programs, some local entities have programs. You have to investigate, and that's why it's different everywhere, and I'll show some examples. But a lot of them are loans. I know the USDA program is a 1% loan. It's payable. You can pay it off over 20 years. So that's a pretty good deal if you don't have the money to replace your well or do some major repair, and you qualify. You can do that. And then the bottom one here, grants. At least for USDA, those are based on really low income, or in one of their programs, if you're over 62, you have the opportunity to get a grant for part of that money. This is just the program flyer. Again, it's called the water. It's called here they're calling it the Rural Decentralized Water Systems Grant Program, but you can look that up online and get to their page and find that information. And it used to be called the HWWS program. They changed it because now you can do septic systems on this as well, and that's new, and it will start this next year. And also it's going from 11,000 at 1% up to 15,000 starting next year, and this has all been passed through the Farm Bill last year when it changed. But it depends on the type of grant. This program in particular isn't directly for a well owner. It's for an entity like, several of the Rcap regions get this funding, and then they give out the loans to people. And I'll go over that in a second. Right now, it's 100% of the household income based on a non-metro average, but it's going to drop to 60% of the non-metro average for your state to be eligible. And so, it's limited in that respect. So these are, they give these grants to these nonprofit organizations like Rcap, the affiliates, and then it's not necessarily everywhere, or the resources are limited. So I know like the Water Well Trust, their program can drill a well wherever, but they only have so much money that they can get through this program, and they have a waiting list. But some of the other groups, Rcap is the Southeast Rcap, Communities Unlimited is a Southern Rcap, and I'm missing one here. No, that one covers both Communities Unlimited and MAP, which is the upper Midwest. But there's these other organizations like Seven Rivers, RCD is just in Georgia, and the Golden Triangle is a nonprofit that's just in Southeast Georgia. And same with Better Living Tomorrow. They get small grants to help people just in their region and in their area. But between Rcap and the Community Unlimited, it's 22 states, and I know RCAC, the Western Rcap, also does some of this lending through funding they get from the state of California. And so here's the RCAC flyer. The household income has to be less than 62.8, and that's and they supplement the 11,000 with 7,000 of their own. And so it's a really cool program. And they also, I think I show a slide here, they get funding from the state of California to increase that because of drought. Communities Unlimited, this is their flyer. And again, it's Communities Unlimited and Midwest Assistance Program map, and it lists the states here. You just need to contact them, or you can contact us and we'll get you in touch with them if you want to find out more information about these programs. But again, this is under the USDA program, so there are those limits. And this is Rcap's webpage, and you can see here individual loan. It's going up to 15,000 for septic systems. And again, that's the other change. It used to just be for wells, but now it can be for well or septic, which is really beneficial because, you know, that certainly indirectly, if you have a septic system that's failing, it can cause water quality problems in your local residents that could affect your well. And so it's important to take care of both of those things. I mentioned the Water Well Trust. This is just from their webpage. Press release from September. They have $1 million, which seems like a lot, but you know, that's probably less than 20 wells in the end. And they get matching funds from some businesses and industries who help support their program, and so that money goes further. But you need to contact the Water Well Trust to find out more about that. There's also another program at USDA. It's called the Single Family Housing Repair Loans and Grants Program. Again, you can look that up too. It's for anything related to your home, including well and septic, but it can be for treatment. It can be for replacing your windows, but it's really strict. It's only 50% of the area median income. So it's really meant to help low income folks who maybe can't afford it or can't get a loan any other way for anything related to their home to help them. And again, if you're over 62, you can get up to $20,000 and have 20 years to pay it, but you can get up to $7,500 of that in grants if you're older and low income, which is, you know, a great program for some people. If they're well-filled, they would have no options. They just couldn't afford it. And so this program really can step in and help. And for this program, you apply directly to USDA yourself. And if someone who's in this situation and needs something, we can certainly help, or we can ask one of the Rcap regions if they're in that area to help. And that's what they're good at. And then here's a flyer for that. I won't spend any time on it. There's also other types of things available, state and local. I just want to show a few. One, there are, I'm showing here the Texas Well Owner Network, which is an extension ran program in Texas at Texas A&M, where they, we're talking about FEMA here because of the flooding and the hurricanes that have happened in Texas the last few years. We reached out to Texas Well Owner Network, and they gave us some information. But there are a number of states that have well owner programs through extension. The ones that are most active that I work with are Rhode Island, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Texas, Mississippi, and Arizona. And there's probably others, and I'm leaving them out. Georgia has a person I know with extension who just concentrates on private wells as well, and there's probably a few other states. But in those states, there's someone you should know if you're in those states. And you can, again, email us and I'll get you their contact information. But when things like flooding occur because of a hurricane, there is relief available. And this is, and again, the drought in California gave RCAC a large grant to provide grants to well owners who need to up to $45,000 for an individual well and $100,000 for a small water system if they meet the income standards for that. But that's, a great opportunity if you're meet this in that situation. Minnesota, their Department of Health is also a very good organization as far as they do a lot for the well owners in their state. If you don't know anybody at Minnesota Department of Health, I rely on them a lot. They're not only are they really good at their jobs, but they have a lot of wherewithal. And so I lean on them a lot when I have questions and that sort of thing. And if you're in Minnesota, you certainly should know the folks in their private well program. Tennessee Housing Authority has this for emergency repairs. This is a veterans program, and if you you can get a water, you can do all kinds of things here if you're a veteran in Texas, and yeah, there's just a lot of these things available. And I'm just going to scroll through these because one, they're in our other webinar in more detail and more examples. But what I'm trying to show everyone here is that you need to look because even not only for your well itself, but if you have an old well on your property and you want to abandon it, there's a lot of information out there, and there's on local organizations who are that are just trying to protect their watershed or their groundwater, who will cost share things like abandoning a well. And the University of Nebraska at Lincoln does a range of things, but there's some who are even on your septic system. Especially out east, there's a lot of issues with septic and Chesapeake Bay and all those things. So there's been a lot of input and work done to try to make sure that septic systems are installed properly and they're regulated, and there's a lot of resources available. And Massachusetts probably has the strictest regulations for septic systems in the country, but they're to protect their water, not only their groundwater, but also surface water and all that stuff. So there are programs available to help you with your septic in those states. So Betterment Loans, and this is all again about Title V, which is what they call their program for alternate systems that are not traditional septic systems that have more treatment involved. So West Virginia Housing, again, this is an ag-related loan program for livestock water. And some states have private well sampling. They'll do, if you have a problem, in some areas they've went in and they found contamination from some business or even a larger factory, and they've went in and put in a community water supply because the entire aquifer is contaminated through that program. And then locally, conservation districts, for one, here's a testing cost share. In Iowa, their hygienic lab does a lot of testing, but the point here is the grants to counties program. So their state legislature gives funding to each of their county health departments to either abandon wells or a cost share on water testing. And in some counties it's free, it says here, actually. So if you're in Iowa, that program is available to you. Our state legislature in Illinois hasn't done such a program. I wish they would, because it would get more people to test for sure. So water conservation districts, the list goes on. And this is about nitrate sampling, bacteria and E. coli. And I guess I got ahead of myself. I mentioned the Texas Well Owner Network before, and the other extension programs. They're in the game, all of them. So if you're in one of those states and you need to get a hold of them, they put on webinars, they do testing. There's just a lot of, Texas has a really nice manual that's available to anyone who has a well. It's free, you can download it. It explains a lot of things about Texas groundwater, where their aquifers are, all that sort of stuff. And it's really worth your time to be informed, just like it says. And then the Rcap Regions, this is from last year, but it's a great slide, so I keep using it. But they do workshops all over the country. Right now, because of COVID, those are virtual, but you can do them online. You can go to their website and find those. We try to list them on our website as well if they let us know about it. And but there's a lot of, the grant we get through US EPA requires us to do so many of these, and so they're happening. And as well as the extension folks are doing these workshops in their states. So it's a good way to learn. Some of them, like when we go back eventually in theory to in-person, some of them allow you to, they'll ship you bottles a few days in advance and have you bring the bottles to the meeting. And that way then they can get them tested for you. And so it's a pretty good program. So a little bit of our private well class. Again, it's 10 lessons. You sign up on our website. This is the front page. It's just privatewellclass.org, and you can click on take our free class or learn by email, and it takes you to a page. I should go back because this isn't that page. I must have left that out. It takes you to a page where you can sign up. It's just your email address, what state you live in, and your first name. And that's just so the emails are personalized, and we ask for the state because as part of our grant, we need to show EPA and Rcap that we're actually reaching people all over the country, which we do. And so that's the only reason for that. If you're on this webinar, you've already given us your email, but you need to sign up and say you want it. And then what will happen is every week, so if you sign up at 7 at night on a Friday, every Friday at 7 o'clock for the next 10 weeks, you'll get an email with a PDF attached. That's chapter 1 through chapter 10 of our class. And again, it's self-paced, you're on your own to read it. But there's a lot of good information there. It's something you can refer to in the future as well. And you can always call us and ask questions. At the bottom of this page is an email address and a phone number. You can contact us and we'll get back to you, or we'll answer the phone if we're here. For each lesson, like the first lesson is called The Science of Groundwater. We also include a bunch of other resources that are available, publicly available and free on the internet. So that if you want to get more information, or the way we explained it in our lesson isn't that clear. I wrote it. I'm not an educator per se. So it may be that there's terms you didn't understand or I didn't explain them that well. You can go to these other sources and we think they're pretty good. And they're all, they're all vetted by us, so to speak. And they're usually from an agency or a university. But there's a lot of helpful information. Like if you have a flowing well, Michigan Flowing Well Handbook, the first one under number 2 is a really great document to explain how you can cap those and all that sort of stuff. All our webinars, like the one today, are recorded. So in July, we did one on septic systems. We do that webinar once a year, and we bring in an expert from one of the Rcap regions who's a septic expert to help with that. But you can watch all of those by just going to our past webinars, which is under webinars and events, and you can see all the recordings and how they're listed here on the side. We also do specific ones. We haven't done this one since 2018, but we've done this webinar twice on lead. So if you have lead pipes or you're concerned about lead, one thing I would recommend you do first is read this, or is watch this video. It's just a webinar like today's, but it's on that specific topic. We actually brought in an expert from Virginia Tech, who's done a lot of work with lead in private wells, and we use some of her information to do this webinar. She's really the expert. For lead and for a few other things, we also have resource pages, and like this page is just privatewellclass.org/lead, and it gets you to all these other websites from, again, we went through and made sure they're real and good information about lead in this case. We have a series of short training videos. These are 4 to 6 minutes long. If you have a shared well, there's a lot of issues that go into that. We've had a lot of problems from questions from people where they are on a shared well and a pump failed, and now all of a sudden their neighbors aren't their friends anymore because they argued over who was going to pay for what. It explains some of those issues and why you need to have an agreement in place if it's not listed in your deed. It's really a lot more common problem than people realize. And then even common things like, why does my well keep losing pressure, or how does my pressure tank work? Our video on how your pressure tank works is probably the most popular one we have. It's had nearly 400,000 views since 2016. And what that tells us is that there's not a lot of great information about pressure tanks out there. And also, that a lot of people are having problems with water pressure. And we know that's a problem. A lot of times pumps are undersized, or your pressure tank's undersized, or maybe you've added livestock if you're in a rural setting and you're using more water than you planned, so it can't keep up, or your tank's not set properly to provide the right pressure. If you're into podcasts, we also have podcasts of some of our information for the first 3 lessons, as well as some interviews I did with RFD Illinois, which is the Farm Bureau network here, on different topics, just to inform people. It goes out to 78 radio stations just in Illinois, and so it's a great way for us to let people know, especially farm families in rural areas, about the availability of this class. It's all free and what they can learn. The entire class is available in Spanish. If you're an educator or a health person or someone who's a stakeholder who works with well owners who may not be native English speakers, they're able to take this entire class, figures included, all in Spanish. And it doesn't get a lot of traffic, but it has 5 or 6 views, people who sign up every month or 2 months or so. And so it's good to have that resource out there. There's certainly areas where the predominant part of the population aren't native English speakers, but native Spanish speakers. So the goal of all of our program in this webinar, all the things that we do really is these things. We want you as a well owner to understand why your well is important and why you need to take care of it. You can't take it for granted like my dad did. In all honesty, when my folks, you know, every time we tested our well after I got older, it's got bacteria in it. It's not safe, but they're used to it, so it doesn't affect them as much. But if anybody else drinks that water, it's a problem. And so you need to understand why your well is important and your water quality is important. You know, you could drink water that's got arsenic in it your whole life and not know that's a problem unless you get cancer when you're 60 years old. And so, and it may not happen, but it's not a risk you should really take or impose on your family. So, so understanding how it works and how to protect yourself from risk are really the goal of what we've been trying to do here. So, I'm going to go through the questions. There's some of them we got today. We obviously couldn't go through all of them. We had 340 people sign up for the webinar, and so we got a lot of questions. But again, if you're willing to stick around after I go through these questions, Katie's taking our questions that you asked to the question box or the chat box, and we'll pull those up on the screen at the end and try to go through them. And we'll go past 2:30, but if you're willing to stick around, that's what we'll do. So there's no well log from my well through my state authority, and the driller is no longer in business. So how do I find records on it? It's very likely you won't be able to find a driller's log, and that's a real common problem. But you could talk to other drillers in the area. Sometimes, I know this actually happened, we had a driller bring us all his records when he retired or went out of business because he didn't want it to go to waste. They may have another driller that they're friends with or worked with in the past. They may have their records, and there's no way for you to know that. But if there's been any work done on your well, like by a plumbing contractor to do something with a pump, they may have some of that information. Or talk to the previous owner if you're not the original owner, and maybe they have more information than they realized, or you can ask them, did you ever have the pump worked on, or some of those questions, because then they may know the depth of the pump setting. And I included this is actually from last time, but it follows, and rather than write it all out again, if you can't find it, there's other things you can do too. The short answer is you can hire a contractor to determine your well depth and pump setting and water level, all those things, but that's going to cost some money, right? But that's one way. If there's no other option and you really want to know, they would be able to pull the pump and find out how deep it is, water level, so you know how far into the under the water your pump actually is, if that's a problem, or if they should lower it, and then how deep the well is itself. Or they may know someone else who might know something. So if you bring them in, and this was a question about California, and I already showed you they have all their records online now. But if you look at those records in your area and your well's not there, but all your neighbors' wells are there, and they're all 300 feet, then it's very likely that yours is too, because that's the aquifer that people are using in that area. Sometimes you have options. You may have 2 or 3 aquifers, but most of the time they're going to use the shallowest one because you don't want to pay more than you have to for drilling that well, and it's usually per foot cost. And if there's plenty of water at 300 feet, that's where yours is going to be too in most cases. So, and the other thing you can do then is use that information that's on those records to get a list of names of drillers that are drilling your area that you can contact and see if someone might have some information. So we recently purchased a home that's on well water. We located the individual that dug the well and requested a well log. He never responded. This is New York State DEC, and was told that logs were not kept before 2000, and theirs was done in 1999. That's kind of bad luck. Anywhere else they can look. So in addition to what I mentioned earlier, I'd go back to the driller and be persistent. Matter of fact, I would use a different word if I wasn't on this webinar, because they should be able to provide it to you. And if you're a thorn in their side, eventually they're going to cave, or they're going to go take the time to actually find it. And if they won't, I'd find the State Drillers Association and see if they're a member, and I'd call them and ask them to contact the driller. Because if a peer contacts them, it makes them look bad. And you shouldn't have to you shouldn't have to go to that extreme, but I would. And because I would, it's my well, they drilled it, they really should provide that to me, even if I didn't pay for it. And if none of that works, I mean this, call me or let me know or contact me. I'll call and I'd be glad to work on that. Because, you know, in today's world especially, you need to be, this is a customer-based type of industry. There's other drillers people can go to if the driller's not going to be not going to be helpful. I would like to find well depths for a few different areas I'm considering moving to. Okay, so we've already discussed that, how to find well logs, go to an area, and it really depends on the state. But like, even if they don't have a nice map online, if you tell them the township range and section, you can request logs, or you might need even go into the office and be able to look through their files. And we've had people do that here before all this stuff was online. And in some cases, there may be stuff in the files that's ancillary but beneficial to the actual logs that we have online. But also I want to mention that if I'm moving to a new location, I'd also contact the county or local health department and ask about water quality and anything they know about wells or naturally occurring contaminants. I would also look online, and I said, like the Wisconsin info I showed, you know, that map is really handy to give you an idea if there's anything to be concerned about. And also you can look, if you look through the well logs, you'll know how deep you should drill, what kind of, you know, hopefully there's some water quality information, all that stuff. I might even call the drillers there and ask, you know, are there any water quality problems? Because I guarantee you, like in Tazewell County, I used as an example earlier, the drillers that drill in Tazewell County all know about the arsenic. Matter of fact, one of them actually contacted us and asked if there was a better depth to drill. And unfortunately, there's not. It just happens, and it's random in some ways. You have wells very near each other. One may be low in arsenic and one may be high in arsenic, and it's a tough problem. And so, and then lastly, I'd contact your state geological survey or water survey in Illinois and the USGS state office in your state to ask about aquifers and water quality information. That's what they do. They study those things. They make maps of aquifers, and they also do a lot of water quality work, sometimes even dating the water and knowing, you know, if you know what water is very old, that means it's slowly recharged. It means it's probably pretty safe and it's not connected to the surface. Where if it's very recent water, you know, that means it probably does have water from the surface getting in the aquifer. And so all those things matter, and they're the folks who understand all that and they can help you. And again, make a list as you go through and talk to people, find out who's helpful and who's not. You know, if there's a guy at the USGS in your state that you call every 6 months or every year, it's probably going to tickle him to be able to help you, because, you know, that's actually beneficial to someone else. It's not just making a pretty map or doing whatever. And so you should rely on those folks. The state does not have my well log, but they do have my neighbors. Am I at a dead end? Well, besides everything else, it's likely that the same driller, depending on how, if you have a bunch of neighbors near you and a more of a subdivision type of situation, then a lot of times when those subdivisions are built by a building contractor, they drill the wells all at the same time, and they have one guy do it. And so or we also run into the case, and this may very well be your situation, that to save money, the driller or the contractor only filed some of the logs in your subdivision if you're in one. We see that all the time. We have logs for four wells, and there's 20 in a subdivision, and they're all drilled the same time. And, you know, if someone's not watching at the state, that stuff happens. And, you know, it's hard to find that stuff out until later. And it's hard to go back and then do something, but it's really wrong. And if you find that out and it's a driller in your area, I would call them out on it and make sure the state knows if that happened, because in a lot of states that would be basically illegal. It's breaking the law if they don't file a log. And so that's important. I thought this was a really great question. So in California, they've created these management areas, and that act that allowed them to provide all their data online and all that stuff. Also, I think the same act allows for these things, and it's meant, you know, they're using so much groundwater out there that it's really a problem in some areas. So the question is there any place else in the US that has anything similar? And this person's in California, obviously, and they said all of this should help domestic well users. But until that happens, I'm hoping the newly formed, these local entities can provide some of that information to well owners. And so the only state I know of, and that's because we've done some water supply planning, is Texas. And they have these independent groundwater management areas. It's a little different. It's not the best approach in that each one is independent and can set their own limits on what is considered, quote, depletion when they would start restrictions. Some say it's 50% of the capacity of the aquifer. Some may say, or 80%, for instance, and they may write next to each other using the same aquifer. Well, how does that work? You know, one starts restrictions before the other one does. And so there's no coordinated, and I won't say no, I don't know enough about it. And if somebody from Texas catches me saying something wrong, please speak up or send a note. But they are all independent. And so it's not as organized as what the law in California is. But I just wanted to show that because it's through the Texas Water Development Board. And we looked at their model when we started doing water supply planning in Illinois. Now, most of what we've set up and through stakeholder groups and some of these regions that were established are all voluntary. None of them have any teeth or legal binding ability to affect water levels, but it's meant more here in Illinois to set up some of these local groups of stakeholders. So it includes irrigators and industry and, you know, environmental groups, and as well as state and local folks who are regulators, if you will, and scientists and university folks. But it's meant to put a plan together now before there are water problems in Illinois on what that would look like, what options there might be, what would have to actually be implemented through our state legislature if they were going to make any kind of rules, because right now they have no teeth, like I said. But it's planning, and that's, you know, it's water supply planning is just that. But here they've gone a step further, and obviously Texas is growing, California is growing, and so their water demands are increasing a lot. My son just moved to Texas last year, matter of fact. Okay, so there are a number of questions about regular maintenance or inspecting wells and all that stuff. So I could spend a lot of time, some time doing that here, or I could remind you, take our class. It's free, it's self-paced. It's just up to you to read it. And it provides a lot more details than we can put in answering a couple questions over a few minutes in this 90-minute webinar. The same about testing. Obviously, testing and water quality concerns are a big part of the questions we get every webinar and through our phone line and stuff. But we've answered most of those things on past webinars. And I want to point out that this is recorded just like today's was. So the questions I just answered, you could tell somebody next month that this webinar occurred, they could go watch it and get these questions answered that were already answered by just watching the video. And so, yeah, because really no matter what the webinar topic is, there are useful questions at the end, just like there are today. And so it's worth your time if you're really trying to learn more about your well and some of the types of issues people have, to go through our recorded webinars. And, you know, the first, I don't know, hour to 45 minutes to an hour, maybe our canned webinar. But after that, it's all questions. And those are valuable to you no matter what the topic was for the webinar. And I'm just going to show you an example of that. Last month, we did a webinar for real estate professionals, and it's on our website under webinar recordings. It's the first one listed when you go to that page. And so I went to minute 128 of a 150-minute presentation because we answered a bunch of questions at the end from people on the call that day. And this is one of the questions that was asked. Gas, air, and water lines. What might cause sputtering, spitting from my faucets, especially in the morning? How do we solve this issue? And then we told them what we've seen. So going to the real estate webinar might be something you normally wouldn't do, but it's probably worth your time to go to the questions at the end. And that's usually the last 20 to 30 minutes or so, because there's crazy topics sometimes that we answer questions, but it's a variety of things, and it'll really increase your breadth of understanding about certain issues you might have, or it might be something that comes up 2 years from now. And you know, in the back of your mind, you may remember that you saw that somewhere. The last thing I want to mention is site assessments. So we put together a national work group of 12 experts from public health and extension, drillers, regulators, and some of our staff, and we developed a site assessment. It's fairly long. It's something that has to be done one-on-one with an expert and a well owner, but in the end, it's a site assessment, a well assessment, a geologic assessment, and we provide recommendations, and it's all free. Rcap staff do this around the country. They've done over 2,400 of these. And what they'll do in the end with the recommendations is explain to you what best practices you should do, what type of vulnerabilities you might have based on your situation, or maybe your well's older and it's not up to code. They can tell you what things are really a risk and what things aren't, and why you need to be, what you need to know about those things. So this is just the first page. There's an assessor, and there's the person being assessed. and then we ask about water use and a whole bunch of other things. And in the end, they take all that information, go back to their office, and they figure out what recommendations they should give you. They even look for your well log for you if it's available in that state. They provide a map, usually a Google Earth image of your property, showing then when they come out to visit, they'll mark things on there like, oh, there's a gas tank here or an underground tank here, or if there's livestock there, where your septic tank is in relation to your well, all that sort of stuff. And it gives you, they'll give you this back in the end. It's something you can hold on to, and it'll have a lot of valuable information in it. So it's like a sanitary survey. If you're a professional who works with communities, communities are required to do a sanitary survey every 3 years, and that is basically a vulnerability assessment of their water system. And it's like that for a private well, but there's no legality to it. There's no enforcement to it. It's just something you can have as a well owner. We also educate people on how to use that tool. We're actually doing that December 16th. And it's not for well owners. It's for folks like health departments and drillers and others, professionals who might want to use the assessment tool in their area to help their well owners. But it promotes best practices, it educates people, and it encourages you as a well owner to communicate, not only with the person who's there, but who your local folks might be that you could get more information from. So again, Rcap's done 2,400 of these assessments. We've held over 40 workshops, most of them led by Rcap staff, with over 800 professionals trained on how to use that. This picture is a local well owner. That's his filter after 2 months, and a new filter next to it on the left, and that's iron and manganese that's taken out of just with the 5-micron filter, cartridge filter. But so they're also working with other professionals. So if you are a county health department or a local health department or an educator through extension, you should know who the Rcap folks are in your state that are working with private well owners, and you should try to develop a partnership. You can co-host workshops together and those sorts of things. Again, here's the Rcap regions. You can contact us and I can get you in touch, or you can, if you're in one of the states that Communities Unlimited, you can just Google them and find that information. But we can also provide you a contact name for their private well person if you let us know. So I went a little over, I apologize. We do have at least one question. I'll pull that up on my screen. I'm gonna move this over, so give me a second. Okay. So if I own a well in Otter Tail County, Minnesota, I had the water tested this fall. Arsenic levels are higher than the safety standard. Where do I turn for reliable local advice and help? I know the Minnesota Health Department, Public Health, they have 7 regional groundwater staff people, and I would reach out to them first because they're familiar with your area. They're very helpful. I know one of their staff actually even told me that we shouldn't include treatment in our class because he sees more well owners who don't maintain their treatment equipment, and it becomes a source of contamination than those that actually maintain it the right way. And so they're in the game, they know what's going on, and they can give you good advice for your area. The Water Quality Association is also an organization that tests treatment equipment. They also represent treatment vendors, but you can look on their website for devices that would take out arsenic. Our lesson 10 is all about treatment, and I would recommend that you take our class as well because there's things to know. As far as reliable information, sometimes people are trying to sell you stuff, and that's going away. It's not as much of that anymore because those folks know that everybody talks these days, and with the internet, if somebody has a bad experience, they're going to not be in business very long. But it's better to be sure, and so that's where I would start. And I could talk to you individually if you want to send me an email too. What does one do about high arsenic levels? Well, there's really, the only options you have are to treat it or to try to find another water supply. And whether that's available to you, if there's another aquifer that might be deeper, because in all likelihood, if you drill another well into the same aquifer, it's also going to be higher in arsenic. That's typical because it's in the source grains or minerals of that aquifer, either the rock or the sand and gravel. I know in Illinois, in Tazewell County, it's all in the sand and gravel, and it's because there's arsenopyrite is part of the makeup of the matrix of all the geology of that aquifer. And so there's two ways to treat that. One thing I didn't mention about treatment, so what we recommend in our lesson 10 is that you don't buy treatment equipment that doesn't meet an ANSI NSF or an ANSI standard. An ANSI ANSI is a certifying body that creates basically rules on how treatment equipment should function. And so to get certified, either through the National Sanitation Foundation, NSF, Underwriters Lab, UL, you've seen those on electric devices, right? On anything else that you buy, blenders, refrigerators, they do that for water as well. Or the Water Quality Association has a gold seal for their certification. If it doesn't have one of those three labels on it for the type of treatment you want, and for arsenic, I know because I deal with arsenic a lot, it's ANSI standard 53 and 58. If you look that up, ANSI 53 or 58, one is for cartridge filters, is for filters, and the other is for reverse osmosis. And that's how you would treat arsenic if you're going to do it. There's probably other ways, but those are the two most common. And so you need a treatment device that does that. And so when you look online, and again in our lesson 10, we show examples. There might be a listing for some company of 30 devices that treat for arsenic, but only some of them, and they might range in price from $1,000 to $70. But the ones on the 70 end are not certified, I guarantee it, because they haven't had to go to that expense. It costs the treatment vendor that develops the treatment device money to pay one of those three certifiers to actually test their equipment. And then it's only certified if it actually meets the right rules. Like it has to treat arsenic to be under 10 up to a level of 250 ppb. It has to be below 10 ppb in the end. Or like, there's devices like that for lead too, and other things. So hopefully that helps. What was the Texas Veterans Assistance Network you mentioned? I'd have to go back to that page real quick. I'll get to that in a minute. I'll find that page and let me go through these. In the early part of the presentation, it was mentioned that there was a representative contact in each state for assistance with wells. I'm not sure which organization that was referring to, but I'm looking for contact in New Mexico. Well, in New Mexico, it would be RCAC, is the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, which is one of the 6 regional affiliates of Rcap. And their headquarters is in California, and I think their private well person may be in California as well, but they have staff in every state, and I can get you that person's name as well as the contact if you email me. I don't know them offhand, so. Okay. Do reputable labs do research of the area your well is in to test for the outliers like beryllium that may be on site if the well is in a previously identified area containing a high degree of phosphorus? There may be a few labs that do that, and I would say a state lab is more likely to than a private lab, but it really depends on the state. Like, for instance, in Illinois, our state lab is down to only doing bacteria samples because of cuts in funding. And our state is, I don't remember what it is now. It's getting old because it's $5 billion in the hole, and so our state agency is really just doing the bare minimum because that's all they can do. But they used to have a lab that did all kinds of analysis. But a state like Minnesota, where their voters voted to provide resources to their Department of Health through a tax to do environmental work, they actually do a ton of research. They've done PFAS research and virus research related to groundwater and wells and just drinking water in general. And so it really depends on your state, but it would be through either if you have a state lab, like in Iowa, it's called the State Hygienic Lab, you'd have to ask them, or in Minnesota, it's the Department of Health, but they have a really robust research program there. So it really just depends. But most private labs probably aren't doing those things. And I'd have to ask someone from that association. It's not APHL, that's the Public Labs Association. There's another one for private labs that we don't work with very often, but we have to know if that's going on. Because it's expensive stuff to do research. And, most of the time they're getting, if they are, they're probably getting grants to do that. So good question. All right. Oh, yeah. So that's our, let me go find that real quick about the Texas thing. Excuse me as I scroll. Okay. It's called the Texas Veterans Home Improvement Program. Title I improvements, eligible and ineligible. And I'm going to throw this up on the screen and make it full-sized again. And you can see there at the bottom, it's the Texas Veterans Land Board. And this, this does not have a date on it. So, yeah. But that's, yeah, it's just interesting what you find if you start looking. That's the bottom line. And as a well owner, if you really want to be on your game, so to speak, and take care of your well and understand how it works, there's a lot of information out there. There's also a lot of bad information out there. There's all these videos about how to put in your own well, and sand points, which are driven with a sledgehammer. They're not grouted. They're usually very shallow. They're in sandy areas where anything that falls on the ground is going to run into the ground and become part of the water there. They're typically very contaminated. And, it's like we have areas like that in Illinois along river bottoms, like in Mason County. It's a huge sandy county, and there's a ton of sand points there. What I tell well owners there is I would never put in a sand point. I mean, it's an agricultural area. There's a lot of pesticides and nitrate being applied every year. That aquifer is over 100 feet thick, and then you hit bedrock. I would put my well screen from 95 to 100 feet, right on top of the rock, as far down from the surface as possible, because sand's a natural filter too. And so we already know that like nitrate levels are higher near the top of the aquifer than they are at the bottom. And the same way for other things, the bacteria in the soil and in the ground will work on those things and break them down, and so all that is important in trying to provide safe water, because your other option is to treat, and treatment can be really expensive. So, all right. Well, thanks for your time. And if you have any questions, there's our email address. Katie looks at that every day. And if you need attendance information for your CEs, this is also a place to do that. And yeah, thanks for your attendance. Thanks, Katie.